Sitting in between Virginia and Maryland, names that allude to the Virgin Mary. America's capital, Washington, D.C., was first called Rome and was owned by a man named Francis Pope. Also sitting upon 7 hills, the New Rome shares striking architectural similarities to the Old Rome. The former power whose deadly wound was healed is identified in the Bible, as well as by many biblical scholars, as the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church was wounded in 1798, when General Berthier, in service to the French army, and under the direction of Napoleon, captured the Pope and ended Justinian's code of religious intolerance, papal supremacy, and religious persecution, and replaced it with a Napoleonic code, which granted religious freedom, among other liberties. However, this deadly wound was healed at the Lateran Concordat of 1929, in which Italy restored the Pope's autonomy and gave Vatican City back into his possession. It established Vatican City as its own sovereign nation. In Revelation 13, the latter beast, which emerges at the end of time, is said to exercise all the authority of the first beast. This implies that there will be a resurgence of laws that imitate Justinian's code and enact the same religious intolerance that was established during the Dark Ages. The unification of church and state and the pursuit of a terrestrial dominion is an ideology that is gaining momentum with Protestants. At the end of time, the biggest supporters of a church-state government will be American Protestants. In their zeal for holiness, they will unfortunately erect an image to the beast, in imitation of the Catholic system, using governmental powers to enforce religious hegemony.
So what we're going to look at is, how did the lamb-like beast in Revelation 13 decide to adopt the same philosophy, the same ideology, the same view of theology, of dominion theology, as the Roman Catholic system did? Protestantism obviously looked at the scripture as a picture of Christ mediating as a high priest in heaven, and the conquered lands is something that's conquered by Christ in the New Jerusalem in heaven, and it's when Christ's return that we're going to see him make a new heaven and new earth, and he's going to populate the new heaven and new earth with, of course, resurrected people with new bodies. Well, this dominion theology getting a hold of Protestantism is actually in history relatively a new concept. It has now shifted into a Roman Catholic dominion theology concept, and it's being played out in the history of America. And so what we're going to look at is what's called the doctrine of discovery, built upon the papal bull that said any place you guys discover is an object of conquest and dominion as long as it is for the church. And what we're going to look at is, how did America become the object of conquest for Rome, for papal Rome, and how, ironically, Protestantism has played into that to the point that the papal Roman Catholic system and its entire ideology that's being played out in this world today is in complete harmony and symbiotic to the role and the self-identity of the United States and its role in dominion theology throughout this world. Well, what the key to looking at this, and what we're going to look into, is the doctrine of discovery that displaced all the Native Americans and deemed the United States as a, quote, Christian dominion for the Roman system. And we're going to look at that very, very important connecting piece of Revelation chapter 13.
Whenever the Spanish government set out and colonized, they brought with them the missionaries. And in those days, missionary activity was deemed as part of the divine right of kings. It was deemed what we're supposed to be doing, spread the faith, that whole evangelistic thing. And so they always brought the priests with them. The priests actually served a pretty good function in the sense that you can say, too bad for the poor Indians, but the fact of the matter is, we were going to come. We, European people. We came to the east, and there was never going to be a choice where the Indians could say, look, oh, you guys stay out, and let us stay out here in the woods.
It's an inevitable kind of thing.
Enjoy. It was inevitable.
Right.
Okay?
Now, one of the features of the doctrine of discovery is the fact that when they came upon lands and it was inhabited by natives, they weren't actually considered people. Why is that? Well, they weren't Christians, and they weren't designated as written in the books of heaven and the registries of heaven. Just as the black slaves were only 3/5 considered peoples. They weren't considered peoples because they weren't Christians, and they weren't using the land to serve the mother church. So the doctrine of discovery never even saw the natives as actually peoples to be recognized, because the land was designated as land to have dominion over for the purpose of the mother church.
The papal bulls of donation have been cited in various Supreme Court rulings to establish the legitimacy for land ownership in America. Who has the legal title to American soil? The United States government or Native Americans?
So let's talk about how the doctrine of discovery in that 1493 papal bull started to play itself out in the United States. And it really came from the pushing of the natives across to the west, pushing them west and displacing them, and taking people like the Cherokee, the Choctaw, the various Indian groups, and moving them west of the Mississippi. And the very precedent for that displacement, was in fact that papal bull of 1493, when natives would go to court and they would say, hey, listen, these lands were promised to us, we made treaties with you, why are you breaking these treaties? The precedent was always, at least as far as legally and in the courts, they'd always go back to that 1493 bull saying that these are Christian lands and you are heathen unbelievers, and therefore you don't have a right to those lands. And one of the most fascinating parts of that story really played itself out in 1823 of Johnson versus McIntosh. And what it is that Johnson had bought lands from the Native Americans, and now somebody else had bought those lands later on from the United States government named McIntosh. Now, when those lands were in dispute, the judge, and his name is Judge Marshall, had ruled for McIntosh because he, at that point, cited the doctrine of discovery in that papal bull of 1493, saying that this is a Christian land, a Christian nation, and the United States was built upon the concept of the Roman Catholic Church going on its ventures of discovery to obtain dominion of unconverted peoples. And so what happened was that showed you the precedence that for all land disputes, the bottom line is in the United States and throughout the Americas, as you'll come to find out, is that that papal bull is the very foundation of all law of possession of land in the United States.
In the Johnson v. McIntosh case, the papal bull was cited by Chief Justice Marshall, who was speaking on behalf of a unanimous court. He stated 3 principles that legitimized a nation's right to seize and own land. The papal bull of 1493, in addition to the authority of the European crown, along with the fact that the lands discovered were occupied by non-Christians. All this, he stated, gave Europe the legitimate right to own the land it seized by force. In the Johnson v. McIntosh ruling, Chief Justice Marshall stated,
on the discovery of this immense continent, the great nations of Europe were eager to appropriate to themselves so much of it as they could respectively acquire. Its vast extent offered an ample field to the ambition and enterprise of all, and the character and religion of its inhabitants afforded an apology for considering them as a people over whom the superior genius of Europe might claim an ascendancy. The potentates of the Old World found no difficulty in convincing themselves that they made ample compensation to the inhabitants of the New, by bestowing on them civilization and Christianity in exchange for unlimited independence. The history of America from its discovery to the present day proves, we think, the universal recognition of these principles. Spain did not rest her title solely on the grant of the Pope. The right of discovery given by this commission is confined to countries then unknown to all Christian people, thus asserting a right to take possession notwithstanding the occupancy of the natives who were heathens. The right derived from discovery and conquest can rest on no other basis, and all existing titles depend on the fundamental title of the crown by discovery.
Joseph Story, a contemporary of Justice Marshall and author of the Commentaries on the Constitution, summarized Justice Marshall's ruling by saying,
"The Indians were a savage race, sunk in the depths of ignorance and heathenism. They were bound to yield to the superior genius of Europe, and in exchanging their wild and debasing habits for civilization and Christianity, they were deemed to gain more than an equivalent for every sacrifice and suffering. The papal authority, too, was brought in aid of these great designs, and for the purpose of overthrowing heathenism and propagating the Catholic religion. Alexander VI, by a bull issued in 1493, granted to the crown of Castile the whole of the immense territory then discovered, or to be discovered."
What we're going to do is we need to talk about the phenomenon of America, and American prophecy, but we have to look at America also as the phenomenon unto itself, and we got to make sense of it. Why is it that America can pretty much do what it wants in this world, and it's okay? It's okay in the minds of Americans. There's a rationale, there's a justification for it. Why this radical, what's called jingoism, patriotism? No matter what America does, the purpose of America is great and right and moralistic. Where does the moral authority come from in that way that even things that in our sense of kind of cognitive dissonance, we look at it and we go, we know that's not right, but that's okay because we're doing it. Where does that come from? That's what's so important to really understand. How does this Protestant phenomenon play into the political system of the United States? What do I mean? Because American charismatic Pentecostal Protestantism, in which the term, which is very fascinating, the New World Order, coming from this new world, and there was a model that the United States was supposed to play in the City of God system of Augustine. Now, you see, the whole point of this doctrine of discovery and making the world the dominion of the Roman Catholic Church is really culminated in the idea of Plato's idea of Platonia, or the city of God that Augustine had talked about, and that America is to be the place that is the catalyst for that idea. So how is it that this phenomenon of American charismatic Protestantism, in which it says in Revelation chapter 13 that fire will come down from heaven in the sight of men? What is that talking about? Well, it's obviously accessing the imagery of Elijah and the prophets of Baal, and when God accepts an offering, fire comes down from heaven. And so Pentecostalism is based upon the idea on the day of Pentecost that God accepted the offering of Jesus Christ as the high priest, and fire came from heaven as a picture of accepting that offering. So in the charismatic or in the Pentecostal mind, when you're given the gift of tongues the way that they look at it, which is strange enough, it's where the oracles would speak in this unintelligible, mystical language, that they are accepted of God. And it's a sign that they have a special, unique acceptance of God, and that's a demonstration of that. Well, American Protestantism plays into the American political system, plays into the sense of the American identity, and that's where you get the phenomenon of American Protestantism of prosperity from.
I've heard people say, it's not about money, it's about peace, and it's about joy, and it's about love. It's about money. Money! Cometh to me! To recognize what this Bible is saying, God is trying to put glorious material wealth and blessings into our hands.
Plays into the sense of the American identity, and that's where you get the phenomenon of American Protestantism of prosperity from, because we are to prosper here on this earth. We have been given the dominion. They have adopted the dominion theology of Roman Catholicism and believe that we should receive all of the wealth of this world. What is here in this world? So therefore, that's where you are getting this prosperity theology from. It is unique to America because of the identity that America has as this very unique new world order that is to basically be a model for the rest of the world. How can people from all different cultures and all different, economic backgrounds and all different ideas and thoughts and philosophies all be brought together and melded into a system that works? And they see these United States as a picture of the ideology for that. And it was built upon, if you read Samuel Zane Batten's work on the New World Order back after World War I, and the whole picture of bringing the world together after a great world war that's to bring peace, right? The war to end all wars. And so they have the whole League of Nations that turned into the United Nations. Well, this is all an American concept, and we want to basically import that concept to the rest of the world. So what do you have? You have the United States to this day going out throughout this entire world to be an upheaving nation like this Re'em. And it is breaking up the ground of all of these countries, and whatever influence it might have of displacing kings, displacing presidents, putting in a new regime. And the idea of that is to create the chaos, and from that chaos, in other words, you create the problem, and then you create the reaction, and then you come in with the democracy solution. And it is this picture of Christian democratic dominion theology.
The Hegelian dialectic is a threefold process of problem, reaction, solution that governments often use to create a collective consensus. Hegelian dialectics is used to describe the linear evolution of ideas, a new consciousness that emerges as a result of contradictory ideas participating in the problem-reaction-solution cycle. An example of the Hegelian dialectic would be how the Nazis faked attacks on their own people and resources and blamed it on the Poles, whereby the emotions of the German citizens were aroused and the Nazis were able to justify an attack on Poland. On a more grand scale, the Hegelian dialectic has been used to describe how governments and institutions create problems in order to gain a reaction, whereby they can implement their predetermined solutions that would otherwise have been opposed by the people. The American government today continues to use the Hegelian dialectic to arouse the emotions of citizens and effectively corral them into a predetermined agenda, such as war.